Imagine this, it's 2 a.m. The whole house is silent, dark, except for one sound. The faint beep of an oxygen machine keeping my newborn alive. And then everything stops. The lights go out. The machine goes silent. The beep disappears. My heart freezes. I run, I check the breakers. The power was deliberately cut. And why? Because one HOA Karen didn't like my car. My newborn baby was struggling to breathe, and someone hiding behind rules and authority decided to play with my child's life. But this is only the beginning. What happened next in the following hours? Emergency orders, officials showing up, and a shocking twist would shake the entire HOA to its core. If you want to know how a simple power cut turned into a nightmare no one could imagine, stay with me. Before I start the story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city's name in the comments right now. I want to know if anyone else out there has ever faced something as insane as this. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this story is going to take you on a roller coaster ride, twist after twist, and you won't believe what actually happened. Now, let me take you back to that night. I had just brought my newborn home from the hospital. She was fragile, barely a week old, and on oxygen. The kind of oxygen machine that never stops, a literal lifeline for my little one. I thought the biggest worry would be sleepless nights and diaper changes, not someone cutting the power in the middle of the night. But that's exactly what happened. At first, I thought it was a technical issue. Maybe the power went out. But then I noticed something strange. The breakers had been tampered with. And that's when the horrifying truth hit me. The HOA had intentionally shut off our electricity. Why? Because apparently I had done something that annoyed them. It felt unreal. I couldn't believe people could be so cruel, so careless, that they would endanger a newborn's life just because of some petty grievance. What followed in the next few hours was a mix of panic, disbelief, and a series of shocking events that involved emergency officials, city intervention, and a twist that nobody could have predicted. By the end of this story, you'll understand just how far people can go, and why sometimes the people meant to protect a community might be the ones who cause the most danger. It was late at night, around 2 a.m., when the unthinkable happened. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the faint blinking lights of my newborn's oxygen machine, feeling both exhausted and relieved that she was finally home after a week in the hospital. Every parent knows that mix of happiness and fear, that constant awareness that at any moment something could go wrong. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. At first, it started subtly. The hum of the oxygen machine seemed different, quieter, almost like it was fading in and out. Then I noticed the room lights flickering. My first thought was a power surge, maybe the grid acting up. But deep down, I felt an unease I couldn't shake. I went over to the breaker box and flipped the main switch, hoping that it was just a temporary glitch. But nothing happened. The light stayed out. The hum of the oxygen machine had stopped completely. Panic surged through me. My baby, my tiny, fragile baby, was dependent on that machine for every breath. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest as I ran to her crib, scooping her up and trying to keep her calm. Her little chest was rising and falling, but I could hear that shallow wheeze, that small struggle that no parent ever wants to hear. I tried calling my neighbors, but there was no answer. The street was silent. The world outside was oblivious to the terror unfolding inside my home. And then the realization hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't an accident. The breakers had been tampered with. Someone had intentionally cut the power. My mind raced. Who could do something so cruel? I knew immediately it had to be the HOA. There had been tensions before, petty disputes over parking, landscaping, and minor community rules. But cutting power to a house? To a baby on oxygen? That crossed every line imaginable. I felt rage boil inside me, mixed with fear and disbelief. I could barely think straight. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone, praying that the flashlight would be enough to navigate the darkened house. I tried calling 911, but the line was strangely slow to connect. Every second felt like an eternity as I held my newborn close, whispering words I hoped would calm her, telling her she was safe, even though inside, I was terrified she might not be. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. And then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps outside. Someone was moving around near my door. My pulse spiked, my mind racing through every scenario. Was it a neighbor coming to help, or the very person who had done this? I gripped my baby tighter and tiptoed toward the door, my mind screaming that I had to protect her at all costs. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, just a single echoing chime. My stomach twisted. Who rings a doorbell at this hour when they've cut power to a house? I didn't answer, didn't dare. I could hear the shuffling continue outside for a few moments, then it faded. Whoever it was had left, and I was left alone again in the dark with my baby, my mind spinning with panic and rage. I knew I had to act. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the oxygen tank we had as a backup. Luckily, the hospital had provided a portable unit. I stepped outside into the cold night, carrying my baby and praying the portable oxygen would be enough. The street was eerily quiet, not a single neighbor in sight. My car was parked in the driveway, and for a fleeting second, I thought maybe I could drive to the nearest 24-hour hospital or call for emergency services. But then I remembered the HOA's threats. They had mentioned consequences for violating community rules. Now, it all made horrifying sense. This wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate intimidation. I turned back to my house, debating whether to confront them or to call the authorities first. But fear and anger combined to give me clarity. This was an emergency. My child's life was at stake. Nothing else mattered. I called 911 again, this time managing to get through. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice cracked with panic. I told them that my newborn was on oxygen, the power had been deliberately cut, and I didn't know who was responsible. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, and that I should stay safe and keep my baby on portable oxygen. While waiting, I began documenting everything, taking photos of the breaker box, the lights, even the broken security cameras pointing toward the HOA office. I knew evidence would be crucial, but in that moment, all I could think about was keeping my baby alive. Every second without power felt like a countdown. Every faint whimper from her crib made my heart seize with fear. Then, about 15 minutes later, flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. Police cars, emergency vehicles, and even a city official who had been called in for immediate response. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by disbelief as I realized the full scale of what had happened. This was no ordinary power outage. Officials confirmed it. The HOA had deliberately shut off power, violating multiple laws in the process, including putting a vulnerable person in immediate danger. By the time they entered the house, my baby was still alive, still breathing, but barely. The portable oxygen had sustained her, but the crisis was far from over. The HOA members responsible were about to face consequences, and I was about to learn just how deep this nightmare went and how many twists and shocking betrayals were hidden beneath the surface of what looked like a normal suburban community. Little did I know the story was only just beginning. The next hours would reveal shocking truths, emergency orders from city officials, and a twist that nobody, not even police, could have predicted. By the time the emergency vehicles arrived, my heart was still racing, but I could finally breathe a little easier. Or, at least, I thought I could. The paramedics rushed in, immediately assessing my newborn, checking her oxygen levels, and making sure she was stable. I handed over the portable oxygen tank and explained what had happened. The urgency in their voices made it clear. This was not just a simple power outage. Someone had put a baby's life at risk intentionally. Within minutes, a city official arrived, someone from the Department of Community Affairs, and the tension escalated. He immediately demanded answers, calling in officers and even utility inspectors. I explained everything. The HOA disputes, the petty complaints, and, finally, the deliberate tampering with the electrical system. He listened, nodding gravely, then told me words I'll never forget. "We are issuing emergency orders." This HOA cannot legally interfere with essential utilities, especially when a minor is at risk. They are being investigated immediately. I felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief, because finally action was being taken. Disbelief, because I couldn't imagine that a neighborhood association, something that's supposed to maintain rules and safety, could behave this recklessly. Then came the first shocking twist. As the city official began issuing emergency orders over the phone, I noticed a familiar face at the edge of the driveway, the HOA president. Her expression was not regret or fear. It was smug, like she expected something like this to happen and somehow thought she would get away with it. My blood ran cold. The official noticed her too and immediately instructed her to step back, warning that any interference could be considered a criminal act. But before she even reacted, another twist came from an unexpected source. One of my neighbors, someone I trusted, stepped forward with proof. They had recorded video footage earlier that night showing HOA members sneaking around the community with tools, heading straight toward my house. The evidence was irrefutable. The city official's eyes widened as he examined the footage. The HOA had tried to cover their tracks, but technology had betrayed them. I felt a strange sense of vindication, but also terror. If they were willing to cut power to a newborn, what else were they capable of? At that moment, I realized this was bigger than just our family. The emergency orders weren't just about restoring power, they were about protecting lives across the neighborhood. The city officials immediately moved to enforce restrictions. HOA members were barred from entering homes without consent, and their authority over essential utilities was suspended. Police were instructed to patrol the area, and a full investigation was launched. But the shocks didn't end there. While officials were coordinating the emergency response, I got a call from my utility company, and this was another twist I hadn't anticipated. They informed me that, surprisingly, the HOA had somehow obtained temporary access to our electrical system through forged paperwork. They had manipulated permits, giving themselves the ability to shut off power under false pretenses. My stomach turned. This was no longer just bullying. This was fraud and endangerment. I felt anger, fear, and disbelief all at once. Every parent in that neighborhood could have been at risk, and it was terrifying to think how close we came to losing our baby. The city official, seeing the severity of the situation, promised immediate legal action and stricter emergency protocols, but warned that the investigation would take weeks, maybe months. Meanwhile, I had to stay alert, protect my family, and navigate this nightmare without letting fear paralyze me. As the night wore on, media crews started arriving, having heard of the emergency orders. The story was beginning to spread, and I felt exposed, yet strangely empowered. This wasn't just our story anymore. It was a warning to the entire city. But just when I thought things might settle, a phone call came that would change everything. It was from someone I hadn't expected. Another HOA board member, someone who hadn't been involved in the sabotage, but their tone was urgent, almost frantic. They whispered words that made my blood run cold. "You think it's over? You have no idea what else they've done. You need to check your home now." I froze. I had no idea what they meant. But instinctively, I knew I had to act. I rushed back inside, checking every corner, every outlet, every backup system. And then I found it, another tampered device, this time in the main hallway where a second oxygen outlet was installed. Someone had planned for multiple points of failure. It wasn't just my baby they were targeting. It could have been any child in the house. My hands shook as I called the city official back, informing him of the discovery. He immediately dispatched more officers, and an investigation team arrived within the hour. The realization sank in. The HOA's malicious plan was much larger than I ever imagined. What started as petty disputes over parking and landscaping had escalated into a full-blown, life-threatening conspiracy. By dawn, the house was swarming with officials, police, and investigators. Emergency orders had been enforced. The HOA's power over the neighborhood was effectively neutralized. But despite the relief, the tension remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the first act in a much larger story, that the twists weren't over, and that the people who had tried to harm my child were still capable of shocking, dangerous moves. Section 2 ended with me cradling my baby, exhausted but alive, as the city worked to secure the neighborhood. I realized that survival in this situation wasn't just about being brave, it was about being vigilant, documenting everything and exposing the truth. And I also knew that the next twists, the ones involving hidden alliances, legal battles, and unexpected betrayals, were going to test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The night had started as a quiet, terrifying ordeal. By morning, it had turned into a full-scale neighborhood crisis, one that would leave everyone involved questioning who they could trust and who was capable of extreme, reckless acts. By the time the sun rose, our quiet suburban street had transformed into a scene of chaos. Police cars lined the sidewalks, city officials were inspecting every corner, and media crews had begun capturing footage. For a moment, I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Relief that my baby was alive, and disbelief that something as insane as this could happen in what was supposed to be a peaceful neighborhood. But the storm was far from over. As the investigation unfolded, the HOA began to fight back, aggressively. Their president, the same woman whose smug expression haunted my thoughts the night before, refused to admit any wrongdoing. She claimed it was a technical error and that the emergency orders were overreactions. I could hardly contain my anger. It was obvious to everyone that this was intentional. Yet the HOA had lawyers on retainer, and suddenly the fight wasn't just about our house. It was about power, control, and reputation. Within hours, a flurry of legal documents arrived at our door. The HOA was attempting to file restraining orders against me, claiming harassment and defamation. My mind reeled. How could the people who endangered my child have the audacity to accuse me of wrongdoing? I took a deep breath and reminded myself that documentation would be my shield. Photos of tampered breakers, witness statements, and video footage from neighbors made a strong case, but the fact that they were willing to go this far only revealed the lengths they might go to protect themselves. Then came the first shocking betrayal from inside my own neighborhood. One of my closest neighbors, someone I had trusted for years, suddenly called me in the middle of the day. Her tone was hesitant, almost nervous. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, "but I think the HOA has more plans, and some of your neighbors might be helping them." I froze. The idea that people I had waved to every morning, people I had shared barbecues and holiday parties with, could be complicit in this, it was a punch to the gut. She explained that certain residents had been enlisted to report on anyone who opposed HOA rules, and that information was being fed to the president. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was surveillance, intimidation, and now a direct threat to my family. The realization hit me, we were not just fighting a HOA, we were facing a coordinated network of individuals willing to endanger lives to enforce their control. Every interaction with neighbors suddenly carried tension. Every glance felt like a potential betrayal. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, double-checking locks, monitoring electrical systems, and documenting everything obsessively. Meanwhile, city officials were doing what they could. Emergency orders were enforced, limiting HOA access to utilities and mandating that any tampering would be treated as a criminal act. But the legal process was slow. I was caught in the terrifying limbo between immediate danger and bureaucratic response. The HOA, meanwhile, continued to spread misinformation, claiming that the emergency orders were unnecessary and that residents were overreacting. It was a psychological battle as much as a legal one. And just when I thought we had reached a temporary standstill, another twist shattered that fragile sense of security. One afternoon, while inspecting the house, I discovered a hidden camera in the nursery, a device I had not installed. My heart raced as I realized that someone had been monitoring my baby's room. The betrayal was absolute. The HOA had gone further than I ever imagined, not just cutting power, but spying on my family. I immediately reported this to the authorities, and the investigation intensified. Police began interviewing residents, reviewing security footage, and even tracking purchases of suspicious equipment. But the psychological impact was profound. The very people we were supposed to trust, our neighbors, our community leaders, were now the source of terror. In the midst of this chaos, another twist emerged, one that I didn't see coming. One of the HOA board members, previously silent, stepped forward and confessed. She admitted that she had participated in the plan to cut power, driven by fear of retaliation from the president. She described how they had coordinated schedules, manipulated breaker access, and even planned contingencies to ensure compliance. But crucially, she provided detailed evidence and insider testimony, turning the investigation in our favor. This confession was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it validated everything I had feared and documented. On the other, it revealed the extent of the conspiracy, far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. I felt a surge of anger, but also relief, knowing that justice might finally be possible. Despite this breakthrough, the atmosphere in the neighborhood was tense. Every conversation felt like a potential trap, every glance suspicious. I became hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. Sleep was nearly impossible. My baby, thankfully stable now on a secure oxygen backup, seemed to sense the tension. Every night, I would hold her, rocking gently while thinking of the neighbors who had betrayed us and the HOA members who had endangered her life. As the days passed, more shocking details emerged. Evidence suggested that the HOA had attempted similar tactics in the past with other families, minor power interruptions, intimidation, and misuse of emergency rules, but no one had spoken out. We had become the target this time, but the pattern was clear. This was not an isolated incident. The combination of legal pressure, media attention, and city enforcement began to create cracks in the HOA's armor. Still, the tension remained. I knew this fight wasn't just about immediate survival. It was about exposing corruption, protecting my family, and sending a message that no one, not even a neighborhood association, had the right to endanger lives. By the end of Section 3, I had realized something profound. Surviving this ordeal required vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront betrayal head-on. The twists weren't over. In fact, the next phase would reveal that some of the biggest dangers came not from those who acted openly, but from hidden alliances, silent threats, and unexpected betrayals lurking just beneath the surface. The moment the HOA's actions reached the courts, I realized this battle had entered a whole new level. What had started as petty disputes over parking and landscaping had escalated into a life-threatening conspiracy. Now, lawyers were involved, emergency orders were being enforced, and every word I spoke could be used as evidence. But I wasn't afraid, I was determined. My baby's life had been at risk, and I would make sure the people responsible faced consequences. The courtroom was packed the first day. Journalists, neighbors, city officials, and a few brave residents who had spoken out all came to watch. I could feel tension crackling in the air. The HOA's attorneys tried to downplay everything, calling the power cut an unfortunate technical mishap and portraying me as an overreacting parent. But the evidence we had, photos of tampered breakers, video footage of HOA members sneaking around at night, and even the insider testimony from a board member who confessed, was damning. The judge listened patiently, but you could tell he was astonished. He asked pointed questions about why the HOA would intentionally cut power, especially knowing a baby relied on an oxygen machine. Each time I spoke, I felt a surge of adrenaline and fear, but also a sense of righteous determination. I told the court everything. The night of terror, the hidden camera, the second tampered outlet, and the psychological torment from neighbors who had betrayed me. Then came the first major courtroom twist, something nobody expected. One of the HOA attorneys, attempting to discredit our claims, accidentally revealed that the HOA had previously tried similar tactics with at least 3 other families. Gasps filled the courtroom. It wasn't just my family at risk, there was a pattern of intimidation and illegal activity. This revelation changed the dynamics of the case entirely. Suddenly, the story wasn't about a single power outage, it was about an ongoing campaign of fear and control. The city officials who had issued emergency orders were called to testify. Their statements were chilling. They detailed how the HOA had forged documents to gain temporary control over electrical systems and had coordinated surveillance on multiple homes. I could barely believe what I was hearing. The people sworn to uphold community standards had turned their authority into a weapon, putting children and families in danger. As the trial continued, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge ordered immediate injunctions preventing the HOA from interfering with utilities or entering any homes. But just when I thought the legal battle might start tilting in our favor, another twist shocked everyone. A neighbor, previously quiet and seemingly neutral, suddenly testified in favor of the HOA. She claimed she had never seen any wrongdoing and tried to cast doubt on our evidence. My heart sank. Could someone else be part of this hidden network, working to protect the HOA's leaders? But the next moment delivered an unexpected counter. The insider board member who had confessed earlier produced even more damning evidence: private emails, text messages, and photographs showing direct coordination between HOA leaders and the neighbors who had attempted to mislead the court. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge leaned forward, clearly disturbed by the extent of the conspiracy. Every revelation made it painfully clear the HOA's actions were deliberate, organized, and malicious. I could feel a mix of vindication and lingering fear. Vindication because the truth was finally coming out, and fear because I realized just how far these people might go to protect themselves. During a recess, I stepped outside with my baby in her stroller, taking a deep breath. I watched reporters talking to neighbors, some supportive, some still confused or scared. I realized that our fight was bigger than just our house. It was about holding an entire system accountable. The HOA had thought they could silence me, intimidate us, and continue their tactics unchecked. But the combination of city intervention, legal evidence, and public scrutiny had exposed them. When the trial resumed, the judge delivered a series of preliminary rulings. The HOA's power over utilities was permanently revoked, criminal charges were being considered for tampering with essential services, and any further interference could result in fines and imprisonment. Relief washed over me, but I knew the fight wasn't over. This was only the beginning of accountability. And then came the courtroom twist that nobody saw coming. The HOA president herself broke down on the stand. She confessed, almost in tears, that she had underestimated the consequences of her actions. She claimed she had only intended to scare me, never imagining it could escalate to endanger a newborn. But the court didn't take it lightly. The judge pointed out the pre-planned nature of the sabotage, the hidden cameras, and the forged permits. It was clear this was far more than a scare tactic. The confession shocked everyone in the courtroom. For a moment, I felt a mix of disbelief and vindication. To see someone responsible finally admit wrongdoing in front of everyone was surreal. But it also sent a clear message: no one is above the law, no matter how much power they hold in a community. As the day ended, I held my baby tightly, exhausted but determined. The twists and betrayals had tested every ounce of my courage, but the court proceedings had turned the tide. Emergency orders were in place, the HOA's malicious plans had been exposed, and the legal process was moving forward. Yet deep down I knew there was still more ahead, more twists, more revelations, and a final confrontation that would fully expose the dark underbelly of this neighborhood. Section 4 had ended with a courtroom drama that shook the HOA, but the battle for complete justice, safety, and accountability was only halfway over. The tension in the neighborhood was at an all-time high. After the courtroom battles and emergency orders, everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the next move. But what no one anticipated was just how deep the corruption ran, and how many more twists were yet to unfold. It started with an anonymous tip. A local journalist reached out to me, claiming they had been investigating HOA practices for months. They provided documents, emails, and even audio recordings that revealed a pattern of intimidation, harassment, and abuse of power across multiple neighborhoods, not just ours. I felt a chill run down my spine. Our ordeal wasn't an isolated incident. The HOA president and a small group of board members had been systematically targeting families, enforcing petty rules with extreme measures, and even manipulating city officials to maintain control. The journalist insisted on keeping my identity confidential, but I realized that going public could protect other families from the same nightmare. After hours of deliberation, I agreed to share my story, photos, videos, and testimonies with the press. Within hours, news outlets across the city were reporting on the scandal. Social media exploded with outrage. Comments flooded in from parents who had experienced intimidation, neighbors who had witnessed strange activities, and citizens demanding justice. Suddenly, the HOA's power was crumbling under public scrutiny, but the most shocking twist was yet to come. During a follow-up city inspection, officials discovered hidden devices throughout the neighborhood: cameras, tampered electrical boxes, and unauthorized access to community databases. It was worse than anyone imagined. The HOA hadn't just targeted us, they had a secret surveillance network aimed at monitoring, controlling, and intimidating residents across the entire community. This revelation stunned both the authorities and the public. As investigators pieced together the evidence, one thing became painfully clear: the HOA president and her closest allies had knowingly endangered lives. Their actions weren't reckless mistakes. They were deliberate, premeditated, and malicious. The fact that they had gone so far as to cut power to a newborn's oxygen machine was the ultimate proof of their disregard for human life. Meanwhile, the courtroom drama continued. The judge now had access to the broader evidence collected by city investigators and journalists. The HOA board members, once confident and defiant, began to realize the enormity of the situation. Some tried to apologize, claiming they had just followed orders or didn't think anyone would get hurt, but their words fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Others attempted to quietly resign, perhaps hoping to escape public scrutiny, but it was too late. The legal consequences were inevitable. In the neighborhood, the atmosphere was surreal. Some residents who had once supported the HOA now openly expressed regret and fear. A few even admitted they had received instructions to monitor families like ours, and some confessed to feeling trapped in a web of fear. I realized then that the HOA's power hadn't just been about authority, it had been about creating a climate of control and intimidation where residents were too afraid to speak out. Then came the final, most shocking twist of all. One evening, as I reviewed the neighborhood surveillance footage with the city officials, we noticed something that made our blood run cold. There was one figure, previously unknown, moving among the HOA members during the night of the power cut. The face was partially obscured, but the gait, height, and clothing matched another HOA leader who had been considered moderate and uninvolved. This revelation exposed that even those we thought were neutral had actively participated in the sabotage. The realization was devastating. The network of corruption was larger and more organized than we had imagined. The HOA's reach extended to multiple residents, board members, and even sympathetic neighbors. It wasn't just a single malicious act. It was a coordinated campaign of control and intimidation. Despite the fear and anger, there was a sense of vindication. The city moved swiftly, issuing final emergency orders and ensuring the HOA's access to utilities, databases, and community resources was permanently revoked. Criminal charges were filed against multiple board members, and city officials made public statements emphasizing that no community leader is above the law. As the story went public, more victims came forward. Families who had previously suffered in silence spoke to reporters, sharing their own experiences of intimidation and threats. The movement gained momentum. Our neighborhood became a symbol of resilience and accountability, a cautionary tale about what can happen when power goes unchecked and petty grievances escalate into life-threatening actions. But perhaps the most personal twist for me was the response from our community. Once terrified and silent, neighbors began reaching out, offering support, apologies, and gratitude. People I had never spoken to before came forward, acknowledging the fear they had lived under and thanking us for bringing the truth to light. It was a powerful reminder that exposing corruption doesn't just serve justice, it restores trust, accountability, and humanity. Through it all, my newborn remained safe. The portable oxygen, the city intervention, and the support of a few brave neighbors had kept her alive. Holding her in my arms after months of fear, I felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and triumph. This ordeal had tested every fiber of our family's resilience, but it had also exposed a shocking truth about power, control, and the lengths some people will go to maintain it. By the end of Section 5, it was clear. The HOA's reign of intimidation had been shattered, thanks to courage, evidence, and the relentless pursuit of justice. But the story wasn't over. There was one final section that would deliver the ultimate emotional closure, a powerful message for viewers, and a call to action that would leave a lasting impression. The days following the HOA scandal were surreal. What had begun as a terrifying night with my newborn on oxygen had evolved into a full-blown community crisis, legal battle, and nationwide warning. The court proceedings were moving quickly. The criminal charges against the HOA president and key members were filed, and the city had implemented permanent measures to protect residents. For the first time, I felt the weight of safety return, but it was accompanied by a lingering sense of disbelief that something like this had happened in a supposedly peaceful neighborhood. Holding my baby in my arms, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. The fear, the panic, and the constant vigilance had been exhausting. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, checking the oxygen machine, repeatedly listening for every faint beep, imagining the worst-case scenario. Those moments of terror had been real. The adrenaline, the helplessness, the gnawing anxiety that came from knowing that a person's reckless actions could have ended a life. And yet, despite all that, here we were. Alive, safe, victorious. The community, too, was beginning to heal, though cautiously. Many neighbors who had been silent during the HOA's reign of intimidation started speaking out. Some shared stories of minor threats, subtle manipulations, and quiet punishments they had endured over the years. Others expressed shame for having complied or stayed silent. But there was also hope that transparency, accountability, and courage could transform our neighborhood for the better. One of the most powerful moments came during a public meeting organized by the city. Residents gathered to discuss the HOA's actions, the emergency orders, and what steps could prevent something like this from happening again. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of relief, outrage, and determination. People shared first-hand experiences, and there was a collective acknowledgement that silence had enabled abuse. For the first time, it felt like the community was reclaiming its voice. In court, the HOA president finally faced the full consequences of her actions. The judge outlined the severity of the offenses: tampering with utilities, endangering a minor, illegal surveillance, and abuse of authority. Criminal charges were coupled with fines and permanent restrictions. Board members who had colluded or concealed evidence faced prosecution. It was a clear and decisive statement. No one is above the law, not even those in positions of authority within a neighborhood association. But the biggest emotional moment for me didn't come in the courtroom. It came at home when I watched my baby sleeping peacefully in her crib, her oxygen machine humming steadily in the background, fully functional and safe. I realized that this nightmare had a silver lining. It had taught me about resilience, vigilance, and the importance of speaking up. And it had exposed the power of community when truth, courage, and accountability intersect. Looking back, I also understood the profound personal impact. The betrayal by neighbors, the hidden surveillance, and the shocking malice of the HOA members could have broken me. But instead, it became a catalyst for action, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, persistence and courage can prevail. I had learned to document everything meticulously, to trust my instincts, and to seek help without hesitation. And most importantly, I had learned that protecting a child's life sometimes requires standing up to systems of power that seem untouchable. As the dust began to settle, I wanted to share one last twist, one of hope. After the scandal went public, several local families who had previously been silent reached out. They thanked us for exposing the truth, for showing that resistance and vigilance mattered. Together, we began forming a neighborhood coalition dedicated to transparency, safety, and community accountability. This coalition would monitor future HOA actions, advocate for residents' rights, and ensure that no family would ever be put in such danger again. It was a small but powerful victory, proving that even in the face of corruption, ordinary people can make extraordinary changes. And now, to you, the audience. Watching this story, you may feel shock, disbelief, or anger. You might be thinking, could something like this happen in my neighborhood? The truth is, yes, abuse of power can exist anywhere. But the lesson is clear. Never underestimate the power of speaking out, documenting the truth, and standing up for yourself and your loved ones. If you take anything away from this story, let it be this: vigilance saves lives, courage changes communities, and transparency holds the powerful accountable. So here's what I want you to do. Share the story. Let others know that even the smallest acts of courage, speaking up, documenting wrongdoing, protecting the vulnerable, can prevent tragedies. Comment below with your city so we can see if this kind of awareness can reach communities everywhere. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, not just for stories like mine, but for the lessons, warnings, and hope that every story brings. Because in the end, this isn't just my story. It's a story about protecting the most vulnerable, standing up to corruption, and ensuring that justice prevails. It's about the incredible resilience of ordinary people when faced with extraordinary danger. And it's a story that I hope inspires you to never stay silent when lives are at stake. The night my newborn was on oxygen, powerless and vulnerable, could have ended in tragedy. But through courage, persistence, and the support of those willing to act, we survived. We exposed corruption, we held the dangerous accountable, and we created a community determined to never allow such abuse again. This is the power of truth. This is the power of courage. And this is a reminder. Your voice matters, your actions matter, and together we can ensure safety and justice for everyone. If you've been shocked by this story, imagine what could happen if people stay silent in their own communities. Every action, every voice, every moment of courage can make the difference between life and tragedy. Here's what you need to do right now. Comment your city below, let us know where you're watching from, and help spread awareness so families everywhere can stay safe. Share this story with friends, family, and neighbors. You never know who might be facing something similar. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share real stories that warn, inspire, and empower communities to stand up against corruption and danger. Remember, this isn't just my story. It's a warning. It's a reminder that courage, vigilance, and speaking out can save lives. Don't wait. Don't stay silent. Protect those who can't protect themselves, and help make your community a safe place for everyone. Because one voice can ignite change, and together we can ensure that no child, no family, and no community ever has to face a danger like this alone.